It's kind of funny. Back in high school, we take a lot of time taking notes. We do it to get ready for a test. We pass the test, we get good grades, we move on to the next level. But our main goal is always getting good grades, passing, moving on. We don't really think about the process of taking notes. That process is so critical, but it's something we can carry with us the rest of our lives. And even in excavation, once we get older, start our own business, do our own thing, it's critical, and it can really save us a lot, and it can also make us a lot of extra money if we do it carefully. It's done that for me, and I'll tell you how. Hey, this is Chad with Excavation Revelation, the place where we go over excavating topics, trends, and strategies to reveal the process to make things simpler for you, to make your jobs go smoothly. This notebook, it's essential to what I do. I carry it with me pretty much everywhere. You can ask my wife. It's always in my truck. It's always in the machine on the job site. It's often in our house. It's always with me. I carry a few different things in it. I carry envelope for receipts. I carry a little field book for a little bit easier to write down some numbers. I make sure I always carry notebook paper so I can jot down accurate notes. I like to carry some graph paper so I can kind of show the customer sometimes what's going on if they're having a hard time visualizing it. Graph paper is a very handy way to scale it and map out their project for them. I always make sure I got a pen, of course, and it's just a simple thing that is really beneficial to me. Now, of course, I use my phone too. I take pictures on it. I type in different things, use the calculator. But I just like to use a notebook too. I like writing things down on paper. But a phone or a tablet work just as well too. Just something that you have to take notes on. So it all starts when you're actually looking at a job to bid it. You want to have that notebook or that tablet with you. You want to start out by getting accurate information about the customer, their name, their address. Make sure you're jotting down spelling correctly. Just little things that you don't think are that particular you might remember. It's good to take your time with them and doing that during that time. Have your notebook right there while you're talking to them and write down notes. You want to be listening to them. Remember, the reason that they called you is that they've got a need, they've got a project. They've got something, whether it's a dream that they want to help bring into reality, or whether it's a pain point, something that's been hurting or hindering them that they want you to help resolve. Your biggest goal in all this, in business in general, is meeting the customer's need. If you don't do that, there's not much sense of doing it. Yeah, we can do projects all we want, just because we like running machinery is one thing, but we're doing it also to help a project meet their goal or meet a need, and that is critical. And that potentially could make you extra money if you're taking good notes, you're listening to what they're saying. You want to be jotting down simple things. You're asking them dates. Is there a timeline you want this job done by? If so, why? Is it a party? Is it a festivity? Do you have family coming in? Is there a certain deadline? Is there a certain time of day you can or can't do it? There are some areas that, especially if you're in a residential area, you're not allowed to start working at 7 a.m. when most people like to start. So just write down any little thing like that you can think of at this time that's going to help down the road. Also ask them, when it's all said and done, how they would like their bid. Now, this might be a really simple project. You might be able to just write them a bid off right then and there on a piece of paper and hand it to them before you leave. But often there's some deeper calculating that goes on, and you need to go home first and calculate and get back to them. Ask them if they want something dropped off in person. That might not be a big deal if they live close by, but if they live a little farther away, see if you can email it to them. That's always a good option. Sometimes people just are okay going by text. You can send them a picture of your estimate. You can just type it out. That way there's some sort of form that you have it written down and both sides can see it. You can even call them and go over it, but just make sure that it is clearly established, clearly written down, especially if it's a bigger project, that they agree on it before you get started. You also want to be listening, again, to different pain points they have. You want to be looking for different things. Maybe they had a contractor there in the past who has done this work. Say, for example, they've regraded their yard a few times, and the grass might look really great, look really green, thick, but it might be as bumpy as can be. And that might be their biggest pain point. They just want it smoothed out. And yeah, you can maybe plant really nice grass, but if it's not smooth, that's not what they want at the end. You want to make sure that you're really listening to their needs. Take your time, write all this down. The next thing you want to do, say you get this job, you want to communicate with them. You want to ask them, do they want a day warning before you come, a week's heads up? My old boss, years ago, we'd get sent out to do a job, create a driveway or something, and the homeowners be like, they'd just be in total shock when you get there in the morning with all these trucks, machines. They'd have no idea. There was no communication of when we were starting or when this is going on. And sometimes they weren't even ready. They weren't expecting us. They would have to change their plans, change their schedule around to make it neat. But we were there all of a sudden. So it's just easier if you just communicate with them. Ask them what's the best way. Can I text you? Can I call you? And how soon before the project starts? Make sure you write that down. So once all that's established, assume you get the project, it's time to start, you're actually there. Bring your notebook back with you. Look over it before you get there. Make sure you're bringing the tools necessary to get the job done that you need from the notes you took. Once you get there, as you're going through the job, have your notebook right there too. Keep an eye on it, especially if it's more complicated, that you're looking, making sure you're going step by step and hearing what they had to say, looking at your notes and meeting those needs. Also, be documenting what you're doing. You do this for a couple reasons. Say you're putting in a French drain. You want to be able to tell them where that French drain is. Yeah, it might be kind of easy to see when it's all said and done, but years down the road, the area is going to look a lot different, and they might not remember where that French drain is. You want to be able to tell them so that if they ever need to get back access to it, they can. Or if you ever get called back to do more work there, say you have to extend that French drain, you will know right where it is off your measurements. You'll have a copy, and you'll be able to give them a copy at the end of the job. So make sure you write that down during the process. You also want to keep in mind elevations. If you're planting grass, write down what type of grass seed you're using. It sounds simple, but if you get doing a couple different jobs at a time or in a short period, it can be easy to get confused what seed or material you're using where. And especially if something doesn't grow in that fully or you have to touch up an area, you want to make sure you're putting the right grass seed or using the right fertilizer on the right job. It's a simple thing, but it's hard to believe it, but we can forget down the road and we can goof things up. So make sure you're using accurate notes. Especially if the job, more often than not, they tend to get delayed. We might have the perfect plan, but there's usually something that'll come up along the line. Sometimes it might be weeks before you start this job. Sometimes it might be months even. You want to be making sure that you're keeping these notes because we all tend to forget things over time. So you're there doing the job, you're keeping track of your records, your elevations, the materials you're using. You also want to be keeping notes, especially if there's a change order, something that came up along the project lines that you weren't anticipating, maybe some extra water that came in that you had to deal with, you had to do an extra French drain or grade differently that wasn't in your bid, something that maybe the homeowner wanted you to do while you're there. Take your time during this process to make notes. How long this extra job is taking, what it's involving, materials, and that way you have an accurate record. You can be able to bill them later for this extra change order. Sometimes it's something simple. It's not even worth messing with. If it's usually 15 minutes or less, I don't really worry about too much. But if it's a pretty substantial change order, I'm making sure I'm jotting it down, how long it took, what all was needed, so I can bill them properly when the job is over. And the last main point when you use a notebook, a reason you need it is because for billing. Like I just talked about, change orders, that's crucial. You want to be making sure that you're meeting all the needs before you send the bill out. You want to make sure you have their address accurate and everything, that it can get sent to the right place. Unless, of course, you can hand it to them in person. That works just as well, too. The more accurate you are with your bill, the more things are broken down, the more likely you are to get paid. This shows a couple things. It shows, for one, that you're on top of things. It shows that you care. And they're really going to appreciate, too, if you're giving them drawings or dimensions of where these things are that they can look back and reference in the future. Send them pictures. That really, little things like this will go a long, long way. You're going to be able to keep records, especially for tax purposes. At the end of the year, especially if you ever get audited, you want to be able to look back at different jobs and have real accurate notes of what happened on that job, what you used, time periods, etc. Little things like time of year it was, weather, they can all change. They can all play an impact on the job. You want to be making sure you're keeping these notes accurate because they can all be used down the road. Also, after the job is done, you want to be making notes too. Things that maybe you didn't see when you did the job, make a note on to look for in the future. Or a technique that you use maybe for the first time, you want to maybe mark down that it worked real well. And it might be a couple years before you do a project just like this again. But you can always have this note section to reference then and go back and look on and say, oh, I used this type of stone on this project and it worked very well. Or the customer had this idea, I did it this way and it really worked out, so I can do that in the future. You can always look back to what you did if you take good notes. But one of the biggest things, something I really even don't like to talk about, is if there is ever an issue, especially with bills, sometimes a difficult customer might not want to pay the full bill when it's all said and done. They might want to skimp out, which I've never really had an issue with, but I've heard different stories. I know, for example, when we were building our house, my wife and I, we got along with our contractor great. Things went very smooth up until the very end when they were way behind schedule and we started getting fines from the bank because of the time period. And we didn't feel we should be paying these fines because we weren't the ones, the contractor. So we were passing along to them. All of a sudden they got really upset and they started coming up with all these additional charges, reasons why they got behind, reasons why they wanted us to pay. My wife and I were out there almost every day. We were taking pictures and I took very good notes. I would jot down simple things that they got accomplished throughout the process. I would take measurements of where things are, especially wiring, different things in the walls that you couldn't see when it's all said and done. I took a lot of notes, especially for change orders. I was very specific when they would call us and ask us about something. I would jot it down and I would go look at it that day to see how much they got accomplished. They didn't realize that we were taking notes, that we were looking at these things. And when it all came down to it, this scared them. And we thankfully did not go to court. We settled, not perfectly, but we didn't get charged those extra fees. They ended up paying them, even though the contractor just kind of packed up at the end and left. A bunch of things unfinished, but we didn't lose thousands of dollars like they eventually, what they originally wanted to charge us. So in that instance, notes really saved me, and they can really save you too. I've done jobs before that the homeowner was so happy with the amount of detail I put in, the amount of time I took to write things down. They were so pleased that they would tip me. I never thought that I would be getting tips as a grown adult man. I thought that was just for younger kids or at a restaurant, but they would pay extra just because they were so happy with the project that their need was met. That is the biggest thing, is meeting their needs. So I highly recommend getting a notebook, using it while you're there looking at the bid, making accurate notes. Use it while you're doing the project to document details, things that could be useful in the future. Use it for the billing process and for your purposes of gaining knowledge of tactics or different strategies that worked well in the future, and for your reference if you ever go back to that same project. Because that is a goal. You want to have a repeat customer, somebody that is so happy that they don't want to have to spend time looking around for a different contract in the future. They want you to come back. They are so happy with what you did that they want you to come back. And that is a good feeling. That is a good sign. That will give you good reviews. It will give you good word of mouth around the area, a good standing, and will eventually lead to more jobs for you. So those are just a few simple tactics that I use and benefits that I have of using a notebook. Maybe it's something you never thought of. I highly recommend it. Maybe you've been doing this already. Let me know what your form is. Do you use an actual notebook with pen and paper? Do you like to use your phone, a tablet? What works well for you? Let me know. And again, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm here to help. So any questions, feel free to comment.